Have you ever heard an animator say they animated a shot on the 2s? Or maybe you've been told to animate your scene on 3s. What are these people talking about? This class is going to help you understand this animation concept. This class will teach you how to pick the correct frame rate for your animated projects. We will also talk about the differences between 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second, and which one you should choose. We will see a demonstration of dots orbiting at different frame rates. This will help us understand the concept of how using more drawings creates cleaner animation. Understanding this concept will help you decide if you should animate a specific shot on the 1s, 2s, 3s, or even 4s. For our class project, I will be helping you create the orbiting dot animation. You will then be able to use the same techniques to animate your own ideas. By the end, you will know how many drawings per second you need to draw for different types of shots. You can learn the concepts of this class by watching the videos, but if you want to try animating the class project, the class requirements are a copy of Rough Animator, which is only $5. You can also use another 2D animation software to achieve the same results. You don't even need to have a stylus for this class. If you're not familiar with Rough Animator, don't worry. It's only $5, and it's really easy to learn. I am recommending this class for intermediate level students, as the concepts may be a little hard to understand for first-time animators. But even if you are new to animation, you should consider watching this course now. I think the concepts will eventually make more sense after you get more comfortable with animation. Hey there, my name is Patrick Davidson, and I'm an expat animator. I work mainly in 2D, or hand-drawn animation. I started animating over 20 years ago now, and I've learned a lot by trial and error. You can avoid a lot of my errors by learning the animation techniques I actually use to complete my projects. Animated projects like the 100-episode web comedy series, Traveling Gringos, or my 22-minute short action film, Trep. These personal projects have helped me find client work ranging from TV commercials to feature films. And now, let's get into this class. Before we go too much further, Patrick asked if I would help explain a few things that might be confusing. The first thing is, let's talk about the difference between frame rates versus frames per second. Frames per second sometimes is abbreviated as FPS. Frame rates are measured in frames per second. There are different frame rates, so make sure that you build your project to the correct frame rate. Some samples of frame rates are 24 frames per second, which would be used in film and movies, 30 frames per second, which is what your smartphone probably records video at, 25 frames per second, that's the European market, and 60 frames per second and higher, like 120, 240, those are used for slow motion. So if you're an American, you either want to pick between 24 and 30 frames per second. Frame rates are the speed the images are shown on screen. Don't mix frame rates. This is important. If your project is shot in 24 frames per second, you don't want to build your animation project in 30 frames per second, and vice versa. Something else I want to talk about is quality. Think of quality as the frame size. The frame size is independent of the frame rate. Some samples of frame sizes are 720p, 1080p, and 4K. Now, there's smaller and larger frame sizes than these, but these are the ones we'll probably be doing the most work with. Well, what's that P after 720? Well, that's when you get into something called P versus I. The P stands for progressive, and the I stands for interlaced. An example of this is 1080p versus 1080i. For us animators, we want to ignore the I. We don't ever want to work with interlaced. So make sure you're always building your projects with progressive format. Here's an example of what 1080p looks like. It's 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. This is the format I use to do most of my animations with, unless a specific project calls for a different size. If you're working with a client, you want to make sure you talk with them before you get started on your animation. I hope this clears up a little bit of the terminology involved, with setting up your animation project. If you've ever heard the phrase animate on the ones, or animate on the twos, or even the threes or the fours, this is what they're talking about. When you are dealing with animation, you have 24 or 30 frames per second of film, or in our case digital, but I want to kind of explain this so that you can wrap your head around the idea. Most animations and films are 24 frames per second. Certain videos are 30 frames per second. And you've probably heard of cameras that can shoot 60 frames or even 120 frames, and I think there's even 240 frames per second. And you get into that higher number, and those are really for slow motion and stuff like that, which there's not a lot of animation that's done in slow motion. It's very tedious and hard to do. So what we want to focus on is either choosing between 24 or 30 frames per second. Ideally, you want 24 frames per second because there's less drawings to build in 1 second of animation. But sometimes you're working with video and that's 30 frames per second. So you need to be animating at 30 frames per second so it matches up with the footage that you're animating with. So like if you have a video of a person and then you have a little character, up here next to him that's animated, those need to sync up within the frames. But for today's little demonstration, I'm going to work with 24 frames per second. So I go into Rough Animator here, and you can see my frame rate here is 24 frames per second. Now, just real quick, if I wanted to change that, I would go up to File, Change Frame Rate, and here I could type in 30. And now you'll see we need to add, let's just add a few frames here to get this from 24 to 30. And now you can see here's 1 second up here in my timeline. So before the 1 second was back here. So I'll go ahead and change it back, and you'll see that this 1 second here is going to move back over here. So let's go to 24, and there it is right here. So you basically have less drawings to do per second with 24. So ideally that's what you want to work with. But sometimes you just have to deal with the frame rate of your project. So here's a little demonstration of 4 different animation frame rates. So let's go ahead, and these dots are going to basically orbit in a circle here. And so let's go ahead and watch that. And so you can see that the first one is the animation looks kind of jittery or it's not very smooth. And as we go down the line, this one on the right is the smoothest. And why do you think that is? Well, it's using the most frames in that animation. And so if I stop this and I pull up a little diagram here. So this is kind of showing us the actual drawings in each motion path of this animation we've done. And so you can see here on the right, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different drawings to complete that circle. And then as we come over here, there's actually 8 drawings for that circle. And over here, if we count those up, there's 12. And if we come over here and we count all these dots, there's 24. So with this information, what would you guess would be animating on the ones? And here's the answer. So the ones is over here with the most frames per second. The twos is about half of the frames. The threes here are using even less drawings, and then the fours is even less. The point of this diagram is to kind of help you wrap your head around the idea of drawings per second. So if I pull this little layer up, here's some math equations here. So all of these are using 24 frames per second up here, like we talked about. So if we're animating on the ones, we would take 24 frames per second, divide it by 1, and we still get 24 drawings that we have to do. If we are animating on the twos, we take 24 frames per second, divide it by 2, and we get 12 drawings that we need to draw per second. If we're animating on the threes, we divide it by 3, and we get 8 drawings per second that we have to draw. And if we're animating on the fours, then we're going to get 6 drawings per second that we need to draw. So why is this important? Basically, you probably won't want to draw anything less than on the fours, That's like the least amount of drawings per second that you want to deal with. But you can get away with it. It's just going to give you a little more jerky, not as smooth looking animation. But I wouldn't go any further like the 5s, or don't go any further than 4s. I like to stay within the 2s and the 3 range, because literally if you want to go with the 1s, I mean that's like Disney style high-end animation, and it's the most amount of work. Where if we play this circle again, animating, you'll notice that the 2s and the 1s, they're both relatively smooth. There's not a huge difference in the smoothness of the animation. Obviously, the 1s looks better, but the 2s you can get away with still looking relatively professional. And you're basically doing half the work when you're animating on the 2s. Now, if you decide to animate on the 3s, you're going to need to draw 8 drawings per second, and it's going to start to show in the flow of the animation. It's not going to be quite as smooth. And 8 drawings is not half the drawings of 12. That would actually be over here on the 4s with the 6. So you just have to pick what style you like and how much time you have to animate things. If you have all the time in the world, then go animate on the 1s. You're going to get the best looking result. But if you're like me and you don't have all the time to animate all day long, you would pick something, the 3s or the 2s is probably your best range. Again, you can go and animate on the 4s, but the results are a little less than optimal in my opinion. So with that said, say we want to animate on the 3s. Well, then that means we need to do 8 drawings per second. And let's take another look at what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and keep these up, and we'll play the animation one more time. There it goes. Take a little time to render. But you can see that on the right, the 1s is very smooth. The 2s looks pretty good to me, but you can see it's a little bit less smooth. The 3s is doing okay, and the 4s to me, it doesn't look that good at all. I'm going to go one step further with this and show you what this looks like on your timeline. So on my layer 1 here, you can see there's a drawing for each frame out of our 24 frames here. So this is frame 24. If we go up to layer 2, you can see that there's one drawing per 2 frames. It's holding for 2 frames here. Again here, one drawing per 2 frames. So what would your guess be that this would be? It's animating on the 2s. So let me just write that in here. And this one is a drawing per frame, so that's animating on the 1s. This layer here is one drawing holding for 3 frames. So again, that's going to be animated on the 3s. And this layer is one drawing holding for 4 frames. And that's animated on the 4s. So visually, these 4 layers here give us an idea of how much work is needed for 1 second of animation. And hopefully this can help you make a decision of what you want to animate at. Now, just because, say you pick 3, let's animate on the 3s for your project. You don't have to animate every shot in 3s. If there's an action scene and it calls for smoother motion, you may want to animate that on the 1s. Just realize it's going to take you more time to do that shot. And if your animation is long enough and you're planning out scenes ahead of time, you may even want to make a note. Let's animate this shot on 2s. Or here's an action sequence. Let's animate that on the 1s. But what I personally have chosen is I like to animate on the 3s. And the reason is it's literally a third of the work of animating on the 1s, and it's still relatively smooth to get your point across where it still looks like animation. That doesn't mean I haven't animated things on the 2s, 1s, or even the 4s, but that's kind of the sweet spot for me where I like to animate. So with the math out of the way, and now we know what these are called, let's go ahead and take one more look at it here. And again, you can see the 4s doesn't look as good as the 1s. And so this is kind of your scale from worst to best, left to right, of what the animation is going to look like. And this is just an animation of a dot going around in a circle. But this principle holds for pretty much anything you're going to do. And so if you're going to animate a walk cycle, if you want that walk cycle to look really smooth and really lifelike, you're going to want to animate on the ones. But here's the trick. You can get away with just 8 drawings to create a walk cycle that looks decent. So that would mean you can animate it on the 3s. And if you're animating on the 3s, let's count it out here on our 3s layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drawings will get you a full walking loop. And then you could take those 8 drawings and loop them, and your little character is doing an infinite loop of a walk cycle. With that in mind, try to break down an animation, especially things that can loop and repeat themselves, where a bouncing ball bounces over and over and over again. You don't have to animate every single bounce. You animate the bounce once, and then you can loop it or cycle it over and over and over again. And a lot of these things can be done in about 8 drawings. Now, the math gets a little different if we change our frame rate from 24 to 30. And if we were to change it to 60 or even higher, the numbers just go up and up and up. So to keep your workload light, try to animate on 24 frames per second if you can. And, you go from there. For your class project, Patrick wants you to create your own frame rate demonstration, like the one used in today's class. You can use the $5 program Rough Animator or any 2D animation program you like. We will provide this orbit worksheet as a JPEG that you can use to trace your own 4 layers of animation. Remember, you need 1 layer for each of the 4 orbit speeds or frame rates. Then, export a QuickTime movie. Don't forget to label each orbit with 1s, 2s, 3s, or 4s to let us know how many frames each drawing is holding for. Now, I know this may sound a little confusing, so I talked Patrick into showing you exactly how to complete the assignment using Rough Animator. So let's go. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Make sure you've downloaded this orbit worksheet. You're going to need this, and this is what it looks like. And we're going to go ahead and just jump into our animation Rough Animator program. Let's create a new project. I'm going to make this 24 frames at 1920 by 1080. Okay, I'm going to zoom out so I can see my canvas. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import that worksheet. So let's go ahead and grab that off the desktop and need to place it. It's already positioned correctly because it's the right size, so I just click off of the board here and it places it down. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this orbit worksheet so I know what that is. And now I'm going to drop the opacity of that down to about 25%. Let's go ahead and add a new layer here. Add an empty layer. And this layer is going to be our 4s. So let's go ahead and call it 4s. Let's add a new layer. Actually, let's just go ahead and start working on this. So let's go back to Orbit Worksheet, and we're going to bring this up to 24 frames. And there's our 1 second mark. We'll come back up to the 4s, and this is the 4s, remember. So this is what we want to focus on. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit on this orbit. And now, what I want you to do is grab the brush tool, and if you have a stylus pen, go ahead. This is a good time to grab it. We're going to make sure we've got black as our color. Actually, you can choose a different color if you want. And let's just lay a dot down. Yeah, that's a little small. I'm going to try maybe 20, or let's try 15. And let's go 20. 20 pixels on the brush size. And if I just tap it, it's going to give me that first frame of animation. And you can see when I do that, I'm going to undo it. You can see it's kind of a gray up here, and it's going to change once I lay some art down. It's going to change that to the purple, and that's how you know that it's not a blank frame anymore. There's some artwork on it. So the next thing I want to do, because I know this is on the 4s, so I need this drawing that we've just done to lay down for 4 frames. So we want to go up to our drawing duration, and we want to get that up to 4. Now once we've done that, it makes it easier for us to add new frames to this. So what I like to do is come down to our preferences down here, and I'm going to select Allow Forward button to add a drawing. And if I turn that on, and I use my keyboard, and I use my right arrow key, and if I hit it one time, it created a whole new drawing that's holding for 4 frames. So this is a time saver for this. We want to make sure that we have that checked for this project. Now you can see we're on this next frame. It's gray, so there's no drawing on it yet. And our last drawing has gone away. If we turn on onion skinning, you can kind of see it bringing back up a little bit. I don't really care about onion skinning right now. We're just going to go ahead and draw a dot on that next frame. And then again, so we're going to repeat this process a bunch of times. So I'm going to hit my right arrow key. That's going to create one new drawing that's holding for 4 frames. And I'm going to put my dot down. I'm just going to repeat this. Right arrow key, dot, right arrow key, dot, right arrow key, dot. And there, we have now drawn all of the drawings for this orbit, for this layer on the 4s. So let's repeat this process for the remainder of the orbits. So we're going to go up to Modify Layer. We're going to add an empty layer. And we're going to name this 3s, because this is animating on the 3s. And then I'm going to take the drawing duration, and I'm going to add 2 frames to it so it holds for 3 frames. So this one drawing is holding for 3 frames. And now I can draw my first dot. And I use my right arrow key, and now we've got another 3 frames added, and I will do the second drawing. Right arrow key, third drawing, right arrow key, next drawing, and I'm just repeating this process a few more times here, and then this will be our last drawing, and lay down that dot. And you can see it gets us to the end of our 1 second. So let's go ahead and repeat that again for the 3rd orbit. So we're going to add an empty layer. I'm going to call this 2s. This will be animating on the 2s. And let's hold that for 2 frames here. And let's go ahead and draw our first drawing. So there's that. Right arrow key, dot, right arrow key, add a dot, right arrow key, add a dot. And I'm just going to try and quickly go through this because it's repetitive. But it's fairly quickly that we're able to do this, especially with that right arrow key creating the new frames for us pretty easily. And there we go. So after 12 drawings, it gets us to the end of the 1 second. So let's go ahead and add another layer. This will be animating on the 1s. So let's name that. And now this one, we're not going to add any frames here. We're just going to keep it 1 frame. So every time I hit that right arrow key, it's just adding 1 frame. So I'm going to undo those. Okay, now let's bring this more to the center. And you can see if we count these up, there's 24 dots here in this orbit. So there's 24 drawings in this second. So let's just go ahead and start laying these down. Right arrow key creates our next drawing, and right arrow key. And we're just going to keep doing this until we've created every drawing in this cycle. So I'm going to kind of go through this as quickly as I can. And usually you're not going to be drawing a dot. You're going to be drawing each one of these dots represents a drawing that you would be doing, whether it would be a walk cycle or a ball bouncing or whatever you're animating. Think of each dot as a drawing. And there we've hit 24 frames. So this sets it up pretty much how it looked like when I was showing you the class. So we've got our 4 layers. We've got our little reference layer at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out so we can see the whole canvas. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to create a new layer. So I'm going to add an empty layer here, and I'm going to name this names. And this is where we're going to write the names of what each orbit is. So let's go just grab a different color here. And I'm going to take my brush tool and just write on top of these what they are. So I know that this first orbit is animating on the 4s. So I'm just going to write down 4s right above it. The next layer is animating on the 3s. And if you want, you can just maybe write the number like 2s or something. But I'm going to write these out. 2s and on the 1s. And this is just for I can see that you know which one is which here. The last thing I need to do is we just need to extend this out a full 24 frames. I'm just going to go ahead and type that in and there. So now when we go to animate this, actually let's do one more thing. Let's bring the orbit worksheet opacity down to 0 so we don't see our reference anymore. And now let's go ahead and save our file. File, click save, and you can just type homework or your name or whatever you want. Save it to the desktop. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and play it. So let's hit play. And you can see once it gets rendered there we go. You can see the speeds. They're all moving at the same speed actually. They're orbiting in the same time, but there's different jerkiness to the animation depending on how many frames are actually drawn. So that's the assignment. So the last thing we need to do is just export this as our QuickTime movie. So file, export QuickTime video, give it a name, save it to the desktop, and save it out. Now this is only going to show us one revolution. And let's go ahead and play that. And there we go. So what you may want to do, this is good enough for the homework assignment, but what you may want to do is we want to go one step further and let's loop all of these so that they are orbiting a few times. So let's go ahead, and the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take the last, let's start with the 4s here. So we're going to take the last image and we're going to add a drawing, and then we're going to add after. And if you're familiar with making cycles, this is what we're doing. I'm just going to walk you through it real quick. Once we're on this, then we click make cycle. You can see it's grabbing all 24 frames with this green line here, but we need to extend this out. And so as I add frames to this, you can see it's elongating towards the right. So if ours 1 second is 24 frames, if I had another 24 in here, let's back this out a little bit. There. Now that's giving us 48 frames, which is 2 full seconds of animation. Now let's go ahead and make this go for like 10 seconds. So 24 times 10 would be 240. So let's try that. And we'll pull our timeline horizontal zoom down, and we should see, actually I forgot to minus the original 24, so we've went 11 seconds. So let's go ahead and minus 24 would be 216, which is minus the original 24, and that should get us right at the 10-second mark there. Zoom in. So this is second 8, second 9, 10 seconds. So we just want to do that same process for the remaining 3 layers here, and that's going to give us 10 seconds of animation in our QuickTime video that we're going to output. we're going to select the final frame of the layer. We're going to click Add Drawing, Add After. And now we come up and we click Make Cycle. Now you see how it's not grabbing these first two with the green here? So we need to come down here to our tool options, and we need to make this 6, we need to make that 8. And you can see that now it's grabbing all of those, and that's what we need. So we come back up here, and so you got 216 again. Okay, so that 216 number should get us there for the rest of these. So next layer, Add After, and Make Cycle. Now again, see, it's not grabbing these first 4, so we need to, went too far, go back to 12. And now let's switch this to 216 right here, and bam, that gets us right to 10 seconds. And let's do one more time here. I might to zoom in just a little bit. Okay, that one. Let's add a drawing after. Let's hit Make Cycle. And again, we need to pull this back from 12 to actually 24. And that's going to grab every previous frame for our new cycle. And I come up here, and 216 should get us to the end. Let's pull out just a little bit. Yep, there we go. Now the only other thing left to do is we want to make sure that we get our names up here, and we want to stretch that out all the way to 10 seconds so that holds during the whole animation. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and save that real quick, save our work. And now if we export this as a QuickTime video, give it a name, save it to the desktop, that should be a 10-second file, a QuickTime video. Now you don't have to make yours 10 seconds. You could make it 1 second or 3 seconds or however many of these cycles that you want it to last for. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up here, and we'll take a look at this when it's done. Okay, let's go ahead and hide Rough Animator, and we'll take a look at our new 10-second clip of our frame rates. So there you go. And you know, if you're looking at this, let's play it one more time here. You can obviously see that the ones is a lot smoother as it orbits around, especially than the 4s. That's the worst of these. So this is kind of progressively going from worst to best as we go from left to right down this scale of 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. So hopefully this helps. This is your homework assignment if you want to do it. So hopefully this helps you get a better idea of frame rates in animation, which frame rates you might want to use for your project. And now you understand when somebody says, oh, I'm animating on the 3s. Well, now you know that exactly what that means. So hopefully you can take this information into your next animation and make a wise choice as to how much work you're going to actually give yourself before you actually start animating. So I hope that helps. Congratulations on completing this Skillshare class. But we're not done quite yet. Let's recap what we've just learned. Today we learned how to choose the correct frame rate for our animation projects. We learned the difference between 24 and 30 frames per second, and that 24 frames per second is easier to animate with. We also learned that sometimes we have to animate to the frame rate of a specific project, like if we need to sync up animation with live action, for example. We also talked about how the more drawings you have in 1 second of animation, regardless of the frame rate, the smoother the animation will look. In creating our class project, we learned how to set up a shot with the correct frame rate, whether it be animating on the 1s, 2s, 3s, or even 4s. We also talked about why you probably don't want to animate anything less than on the 4s. And as a good tip, we learned that a lot of animation can be achieved by animating with only 8 drawings. Things like walk cycles and bouncing balls. Remember, if we are drawing 8 drawings per second, that is called animating on the 3s. And thank you for taking my class today. I hope you are able to learn something valuable. This has been Patrick Davidson, the Expat Animator. See you next time. If you found this useful, click the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe.
Click this video for more animation tips. Leave any questions you have in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and keep on animating!